Welcome, friends. We are expecting a crowd today, so we are going to let folks make their way in from the waiting room, and we will get started in just a moment. All right. I suspect the Zoom room will continue to fill up, but let's not delay another moment. Welcome to the first Lunch and Learn of 2025. And thank you for joining us to kick off the 2025 legislative session with Maine's Environmental Priorities Coalition. My name is Kathleen Neal. I'm the Senior Director of Policy and Partnerships here at Maine Conservation Voters and Maine Conservation Alliance. Our organizations represent more than 13,000 members and supporters dedicated to protecting the environment in Maine and our democracy. MCA does that through education, collaboration, and advocacy, and MCV by influencing public policy, holding politicians accountable, and winning elections. One of the best things that MCA gets to do is to convene and facilitate Maine's Environmental Priorities Coalition. Since 2020, I'm sorry, since 2004, more than 20 years ago, the EPC has brought people together to protect the land, water, and wildlife in Maine, to tackle climate change, to advance environmental justice, and to build healthy and sustainable communities through collective action and legislative advocacy. Today, the Environmental Priorities Coalition includes 39 environmental, public health, conservation, and climate action organizations. Together, these organizations, large and small, national, statewide, and local, represent more than 120,000 Maine people who all want to protect the environment and build a just, thriving future for all. You can see on the screen right now the logos of all 39 EPC members. Later this afternoon, when you get that follow-up email, you will also get a list of EPC members and contact information for each organization. In addition to the incredible work that we get to do together, each of these organizations does absolutely amazing and important work. And so that is going to be one of the highlights of your afternoon email is figuring out how to connect with all these incredible folks. I do wish we had time today for each of our EPC organizations to introduce themselves and their work, but I promise that you will all get that information and we'll continue connecting online and off. We're going to hear from two incredible speakers today, members of the MCA and MCV team, and really important folks in the world of the Environmental Priorities Coalition. Cathy Breen is the Director of Government Affairs here at MCA and MCV. She represents the EPC at the State House. So every single coalition priority, Cathy is the face of that bill at the State House, along with the EPC organizations leading the work. Nick Janzen is our partnerships director. As well as leading our work in democracy, Nick has the incredibly important role of convening those 39 organizations and helping us all work in the same direction and come up with this shared agenda that you're about to hear more about. We have a very tight agenda today, and before we dive in, I want to just let you know a couple of things. You are all muted, but we do want to hear from you. You can send questions to me or to Maggie Summers through the chat whenever they occur to you. We will compile those questions and organize them and get to as many as possible in the Q&A session at the end. We've got such a terrific and expansive agenda today that both for this meeting and for the legislative session ahead, that I have a feeling we're not going to get to everything. But send those questions anyway. Many of you know that one of Maggie's magical skills is organizing those questions and making sure you get answers to them, even if we don't have time to tackle them all today. This event is being recorded, and the video will be posted on our website and on YouTube later this afternoon. You will all get an email with the link. Feel free to forward that around. There will be some attachments there and links to the other information about the priority bills and about the coalition. And that is yours to share. Okay, on to the good stuff. Each year, the EPC identifies a slate of priority bills that we have a hunch will have the greatest impact in protecting the environment in Maine, protecting our public health, and shoring up our climate future. The bills we're going to talk about today are not the only bills any of our organizations track, support, or celebrate, but they represent our best collective efforts to advance climate action, further environmental justice, protect biodiversity in our environment, and cultivate healthy and sustainable Maine communities. This year, we have 9 priority bills. Together, they will help us recognize Wabanaki sovereignty and establish energy rights for Maine consumers, help us transition to 100% clean electricity by 2040, and establish a climate superfund modeled after the ones recently instituted in Vermont and New York. Help us incorporate climate impacts into state transportation planning. Help us update Maine's growth management law to support climate resilience. Help us establish and fund a program to dispose of toxic PFAS-containing firefighting foam, and help us protect land and water by identifying ways to address stormwater pollution and funding the Land for Maine's Future program. None of these bills have been printed yet, which means we don't have LD numbers. LD stands for legislative document, and LD numbers are the best way to track a bill throughout the session. Bills get assigned an LD when they're printed, and that takes a while. So you can count on us to share those LD numbers, status updates, and opportunities for action as these bills work their way through the legislature. But first, you probably want to hear about them. Nick and Cathy are going to walk us through the agenda. Many of the lead advocates for these priority bills are in the Zoom room with us today, and we may pull them into the Q&A at the end, but we'll make sure you have ways to connect with them if you have more questions as you listen. Okay, that's a lot of introductory information. Cathy, I am going to turn it over to you to talk about our first priority. This is not going to surprise any of you who have been in this work for us for a while. Once again, the coalition is focused on Wabanaki self-determination this year. Cathy, tell us more.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. Our sponsor for this bill this year is now State Senator Rachel Talbot Ross. And as folks know, we work hand in hand with the Wabanaki Alliance, and we follow their lead on all legislative matters. We are still working for tribal self-determination, which is the right of Indigenous nations to govern themselves. Under the U.S. Constitution, federally recognized tribes have a government-to-government relationship with the United States and the power to regulate affairs on tribal lands. However, the Wabanaki nations have a different, more restrictive status here in what we call Maine than other federally recognized tribes in the United States. The state of Maine has interpreted this legislation from 1980 to deny the Wabanaki Nation's tribal self-determination effectively reducing Wabanaki nations to municipalities and excluding the Holton Band of Maliseet Indians, the Mi'kmaq Nation, Passamaquoddy Tribe, and Penobscot Nation from many rights and protections guaranteed by federal Indian law. This has had negative effects on tribal Indigenous people in Maine. In 2020, a bipartisan task force recommended changes to the 1980 law to restore self-governance over a range of issues, including criminal justice, the use of natural resources, gaming, taxation, and land acquisition. Since then, 3 consecutive Maine legislatures have considered bills to recognize the inherent sovereignty of the Wabanaki nations by implementing the task force recommendations. We continue to strive for Wabanaki self-determination. We will continue the fight this year, and we welcome your help in moving this bill forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Cathy. One of the other bills that we will be working on together to advance environmental justice is one to protect Mainers from rising utility costs. We're calling this our Energy Justice Bill, and it is sponsored by Senator Ann Carney. Nick, tell us more.
Yeah, this is a really innovative bill. Actually, MCV's Climate and Clean Energy Director, Lucy Hochstartner, is leading on this with a really diverse group of advocacy organizations, renewable energy companies, and the EPC itself. Broadly, this bill is really designed to protect as many Mainers as we can from dangerous service shutoffs. It limits predatory advertising practices, and it would help reduce utility profiteering. I'm sure this is no surprise to many of you, but electricity is really expensive in Maine. We have some of the fastest rising costs in the country, and low-income Mainers in particular are spending more than twice what's considered affordable on electricity. All the while, Maine's electric utilities are making hundreds of millions of dollars in profit, and we don't think that balance is right. So this bill would do a few things. It would limit disconnections to households with elderly folks, infants, and people with chronic medical conditions. It would expand a medical waiver program that already exists to be more inclusive and protective. It would also require additional reporting on utility disconnections. We don't have a great sense of that in terms of public data that's available and easily accessible. So we need to do some collection there to understand if additional policy changes are needed. It would also prevent what we call competitive electricity providers from essentially playing games and tricking folks into paying higher rates with these predatory advertising practices that some try to get away with. And then the last big piece is that it would create a set of fairness and affordability standards that would essentially lead to a process where utility customers could be refunded if utility profits become too excessive.
This is such an exciting bill because we know that more and more of our energy needs are going to be met by electricity as opposed to fossil fuels. That's a good thing. We've got to make sure it's an affordable and sustainable thing for consumers as well. But speaking of that transition, we also have a priority bill to transition Maine to 100% clean electricity by 2040. Cathy, tell us more.
Thank you very much. This bill is being led by our partners in the Natural Resources Council of Maine, and they're available to take questions afterwards. And this bill grows directly out of the Climate Council's work, and Maine Won't Wait. And so what we're trying to put into Maine statute is to achieve 100% clean electricity for Maine by 2040. Maine's dependence on fossil fuels for heating, transportation, and electricity generation is the primary driver of high energy prices facing Maine families and businesses. And burning fossil fuels, as we know, is a primary cause of climate change, which is already harming our communities through flooding, droughts, and extreme storm damage. In addition, Maine sends more than $4 billion out of state every year to pay for oil and gas, money that could be spent right here in Maine creating homegrown clean energy generation and jobs. 100% clean electricity by 2040 is a practical path forward to a lower cost energy future and a strong, clean energy economy. Creating more homegrown, clean energy sources will save Mainers money. It'll create really good, family sustaining, well paying jobs, and it'll benefit the environment for generations of Mainers to come. Clean energy solutions help Mainers save money and make us more energy dependent by diversifying our energy mix and reducing reliance on fossil fuels. We can also be sure that we do this responsibly so that we continue to protect Maine's heritage fishing and farming industries, even as we grow our clean energy economy. Advancing the clean energy transition will reduce air pollution and help us avoid the worst effects of climate change and also create really good business and jobs right here in Maine.
I love this one too. Thank you so much, Cathy. And as we make this transition to clean energy and reduce our emissions, we also have to sort of reckon with the fact that a lot of climate damages are already baked in. We're experiencing them now. We'll continue to experience them. Last winter's storms were a reminder that can be devastating and expensive. So there is a priority bill to make sure that the folks who caused those damages are the ones who pay for them. Nick, tell us more.
Yeah, this is another really novel bill. In short, it would require the world's largest fossil fuel corporations to pay their share of the damage that's being caused to Maine specifically by their greenhouse gas emissions. We saw last winter all the damage those storms caused. There's very clear attribution science done in the aftermath of that linked those storms to climate change. And we saw over $90 million in damage just to public infrastructure from those two storm events. And that doesn't even count what damage there was to private property. And so if we don't pass a bill like this, the cost to repair that type of damage is going to fall on all of us. It's going to fall on Maine taxpayers. Another reason that I personally find this bill really interesting is that it builds on the original Superfund law. That's where the name Climate Superfund comes from. And so it's this new application of a really time-tested and well-defended legal principle called polluter pays. Um, Vermont and New York just passed bills like this. There's several other states across the country that are working on this. The bills in Vermont and New York passed with bipartisan support. We're certainly hoping to replicate that here. There's also been a bill that's introduced at the federal level. So there's a lot of momentum behind this, and I think it's both really important for Maine to be involved with that, so we don't have to spend public dollars on these climate adaptation costs that we know we're going to have to incur. And there's a lot of momentum around it too. So it's going to be important for Maine to be involved in that and be able to take advantage of it.
Thank you. We had our friends from Vermont on a Lunch and Learn a few weeks back talking about how they built that support for the Climate Super Fund. That's archived on the YouTube page. I'd suggest taking a look, and we'll continue to share those lessons. I love it when we get to be part of novel things, but also have lessons and friends to draw on so that we're not making it all up as we go along. Cathy, one of our other bills is speaking of not making it all up as we go along, is bringing a little bit of climate smart planning to our transportation system. Tell us about this bill.
Sure thing. This is another bill that we're working with our friends at NRCM. And as we know, everybody in this community, that transportation emissions are the largest source of climate pollution in Maine. Right now, transportation planning is not required to consider climate pollution in their planning. And that is not working to further our climate goals. As Maine grows and develops, it's more important than ever that state transportation planners take climate change into consideration when reviewing and approving transportation projects. As some of you know, the DOT puts together plans in 5-year increments. Many of you will see those plans in newsletters from your state legislators or from other sources in your town or straight from the DOT. It's long range planning because it's huge amounts of money involved. And so it's really important that we link that long range planning to our greenhouse goals. Investing in clean transportation options like more frequent and reliable transit and safer streets for alternative transportation will improve safety, protect our health, and support local economic growth. So this bill would ensure that new proposed transportation projects will have to incorporate into their modeling long-term climate impacts and take into consideration our state's long-term greenhouse gas emission goals, alternative energy goals, and all of those very important climate metrics we've been developing, and link those to transportation planning over the long haul. Aligning transportation planning with climate goals will create economic health, safety, and equity benefits by encouraging more investment in public transportation and safer streets across the state. So we feel like this is a very common sense bill that links two sort of siloed streams in state government and links them so that they're mutually beneficial.
Cathy, you're on a roll with smart planning. You want to keep going with our next priority bill about the growth management law?
Absolutely. As a former town councilor, I'm very familiar with the way that our towns and cities all over Maine work on how they're going to manage growth in the future. And many of them use something that's developed over 24 years ago called the Growth Management Act. And that is the act that defines how towns and cities do something called a comprehensive plan. And once that comprehensive plan is done every 10 years or so, hopefully that plan gets then translated into ordinances, which then drive development in that town or city. However, that law is really, really outdated, and it's not keeping up with modern needs and modern information, needs like housing and social spaces and locally grown food, and also the fact that we know so much more now about climate change and how development impacts climate change. So many municipalities are working to rebuild their local economies to recover from long-term industry shifts and support growth, while others are working to navigate really significant population growth. Climate change requires new thinking about infrastructure, public services, housing, open space, habitat protection, and more. Housing shortages are making it difficult for people to afford to live near their jobs and almost impossible for communities to attract new workers and families. So this law proposes to renovate, update, and modernize Maine's 34, I said 24, it's actually 34 years old, growth management law and comprehensive planning requirements. We saw this bill last session. A lot of work went into it. Unfortunately, it did not quite make it over the finish line, but our friends at Grow Smart Maine joined the Environmental Priorities Coalition this past summer and brought this bill to the coalition for the first time. And we really felt like it aligned with many of our goals, especially growing healthy communities. So this is going to encourage this new law, hopefully, when it's finished, is going to encourage municipalities to direct new development into growth areas that they already have, making efficient use of public services and existing infrastructure while preventing development that promotes sprawl and promotes more traffic. Updating our growth management law will help Maine communities address the current housing crisis without undermining climate action or creating the next crisis in access to working farmland, forests, water, and outdoor recreation spaces. So Nancy Smith from Grow Smart Maine has joined us and is available after, to take questions. But for anybody in our audience who's been involved in local planning on a planning board or a long-range planning board, town council, you're very familiar with this act and the fact that we really need to update it.
So many of the most pressing challenges facing our state are actually facing our local leaders, right? Our communities directly. So I'm really excited to see the growth management law on the agenda. Speaking one of those pressing challenges that our communities are facing, we were lucky enough to chat with Representative Dan Ankely's a few weeks ago about the PFAS spill in Brunswick. His bill to prevent spills of toxic PFAS foam is part of the EPC agenda. So Nick, tell us a little bit more about that.
The legislature is considering several bills this session related to PFAS. I think this one was especially important for the EPC to prioritize. So we all know about that spill that happened in Brunswick last year. It was specifically a spill of aqueous film forming foam, which is a firefighting suppressant. And when it spilled, it entered the public sewer system, got into the Androscoggin River and nearby waterways. And there's some pretty serious long-term and environmental and public health consequences from that. So that was a spill of about 1,500 gallons of AFFF. There's about 50,000 gallons of AFFF stored across the state. So we need a collection and management system to remove this stuff because there really isn't one that exists right now. And, to the extent that other states and towns are removing AFFF, it's really just being sent to other, usually poorer communities because there aren't any good destruction technologies right now. And none of us feel good about just exporting our own toxic foam and forcing others to deal with the contamination. So this bill is designed to establish and then fund a collection system that will give Maine communities a safe and equitable way to remove and dispose of this stuff so we don't continue to deal with the harmful consequences of storing it here.
Thank you. I misspoke earlier when I said none of our EPC bills have been printed yet. This one actually got printed yesterday. So it has an LD number. It is LD 222. And it is the latest in the EPC, I think, has had PFAS, bills to grapple with PFAS on the agenda for several years running. Maine has been at the forefront of this work, which is work that is happening across the country. So really appreciate the leadership from our friends at Defend Our Health on making sure the coalition and the state are right on top of this. Another area that we need to keep leading is what we do with stormwater pollution. Nick, tell us about that.
Yeah, so it's a resolution. It's a study that will help us identify ways to prevent stormwater pollution, essentially. So when stormwater runs off the land and gets into the river and the ocean and into our wetlands, it carries a bunch of nasty stuff with it. It has bacteria, it carries nutrients that feed harmful algal blooms, it has pesticides and other toxic chemicals in it that can harm aquatic life. And while Maine has taken many steps to reduce stormwater pollution over the past several years, there's still a lot more we need to do, particularly as increased development means there are fewer wetlands to filter runoff. There's more intense storms delivering more water over a shorter period of time. And in combination, these pressures are really overwhelming drainage systems. It's washing out roads, it's eroding bluffs, and it's just causing towns a lot of problems. So this study is going to give us the additional data and input we need from a really broad array of stakeholders, and collectively we'll be able to identify the policy changes we need to make to implement positive change in the future.
Thank you so much. All right, you have all been troopers. We have got one more bill on our agenda to talk about. It is an oldie but goodie, and I cannot think of a better person to talk about it than Cathy Breen, who in a previous life helped fund the Land for Maine's Future program in her role as chair of the Appropriations Committee. Now she's on the advocacy side of things, and Cathy, how are we going to get it done this time? Or what do we need to get done?
Well, I have a long history with Land for Maine's Future, going back to when I was a town councilor. And it was a real pleasure to work on it when I was in the legislature. And really, LMF is one of our sort of backbone programs in Maine that contributes not only to protecting our forests and working forests, farmlands, recreation space, working waterfronts, but conserving land is a huge and important strategy in fighting climate change and adapting to a changing climate. LMF is the most successful and celebrated land conservation program in Maine history. Over nearly 4 decades, LMF has helped conserve more than 650,000 acres of land, including 330,000 acres of working forests, almost 10,000 acres of farmland, 1,200 miles of shoreland, 158 miles of recreational trails, 73 recreational water access sites, and 30 commercial working waterfronts. And those have been spread across all 16 counties in Maine. This program is critical to protecting Maine's character and traditions. Typically, we have in the past issued bonds to fund the Land for Maine's Future program, which of course require 2/3 approval of the legislature and then go to the voters. The last time we funded this program, we didn't have to issue any debt, but because we had a surplus, and we put $40 million into the budget in 2021 so that we could spend $10 million a year over 4 years. Well, guess what? Those 4 years are up, and the fund is now about to be empty again. And so we're tackling LMF on two fronts. One is a short-term strategy to try to get money available right now to replenish the fund. And then the other one is to develop a long-term strategy that finds some sort of mechanism that will just continually fund the program so that we don't have to borrow money, and that we will figure out a way through some fees or licensing or somehow so that money just continues to flow in. We're working in partnership this year with Maine Audubon, Appalachian Mountain Club, and NRCM, as well as Maine Coast Heritage Trust is working on LMF. We already have bipartisan sponsorship for this bill. We don't have an LD number, but we're hoping, and also the governor's office has told us that this is a big priority for them. If the governor does put together a bond package, this would likely be included. So it's a huge priority for all of us, and I'm sure this audience is very familiar with LMF. The last thing I want to say that's so great about LMF is that typically the state funding is about 20% of the total project cost. But when a project gets LMF funding, it's a tremendous lever to get other government funds, federal conservation funds, as well as private funds. So it's not that the state pays everything by any means. It's just that the state pays into it, and then that money leverages enormous money from other sources. So it's really successful on every front.
When we hear about a program like LMF that has been so successful for so long, there's a part of me that wants to tear my hair out that there's any sort of fight involved about paying for it. It's so obviously a good investment for all of us, but that's where we are, and we've got a lot of big priorities, as you heard just now, and there's a lot more to say about each of these bills. Later this afternoon, everyone who registered for this event will get a follow-up email with links to the EPC website, a fact sheet for each of the priority bills, contact information for all of the EPC members, and a way to take action or to pledge to take action, because there isn't quite a lot for you to do yet, but there sure will be. This agenda is only going to move if each of us takes action. Our representatives at the State House have a lot of competing priorities, and it makes a big difference to them to hear what we care about, what our priorities are. That's the beauty and the power of the Environmental Priorities Coalition, is to help us all speak with one voice about the things that matter so much to all of us. So you will get action alerts, the very first one today, a pledge to take action, and you will hear from us throughout the session when there are opportunities to deliver testimony at public hearings, or to write a letter to the editor, or to reach out to your lawmaker directly and say, hey, fund the Land for Maine's Future and do something about that PFAS polluted film, and all of these other priorities. You should also know that every member of the legislature got a bright green folder this week with all of those fact sheets and contact information as well. So they've heard of these priorities already, and they'll recognize them when you bring them up again. All right. I know we have a ton of good questions in the chat already, and you can keep those going. I'm going to go off script first thing, Nick and Cathy, and ask you, what about the bills that aren't on the EPC agenda? Are they not important, or what's the story with that? And particularly, I'm thinking about LD1, which has gotten a lot of attention recently. I promise to get back to the EPC priorities after this, but
Well, I'll tell you, Kathleen, we had a bit of a interesting process at the beginning of this legislative session. Typically, when the legislature is sworn in, they have a couple of weeks to put their bills in and meet a date which is known as cloture, which means it's the deadline for everybody in the legislature to get their bills in. So for many, many years, the EPC has done a process that syncs with that program, so that we do all of our work in the summer and fall, and we come together in December, and often those timelines match up quite nicely. This year, the legislative leaders did a little something different and moved that cloture date to the second week in January. So we did our process in December, and then we had a couple of weeks for the legislature and the administration to continue to put in bill titles. Not to worry, we are still in communication with all those folks, and we do have a process where we can amend our list, we can add to our list. We also, as Maine Conservation Voters, have a separate track where we build our scorecard. And so we have our Maine Conservation Voters has its own process for prioritizing bills. So even if something is not on this list, we still have capacity to take on more priorities, and certainly there'll be some defensive priorities as well as bills come out. Nick, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Just that, Kathleen, you're right. There's a ton of really important work that MCV is doing, that all of the organizations in the Environmental Priorities Coalition is doing that are, those bills are not on this list. And that does not mean they're not important. I think one of the really great things about the EPC is that it allows the environmental community in Maine, all of our organizations, and all of the members of those organizations to hear about all this legislation. It basically serves as a place to share information, to get action alerts out, to get people to the state house, and just organize ourselves as the environmental community, even if they're not one of these 9 priority bills.
We often talk about the sheer number of bills considered by the Maine legislature each year. It is regularly more than 2,000, so there might be more than 9 that are really important, but it's nice to have a short list. It's nice to be able to count the EPC bills on 2 hands. So we'll help you make your way through the other, 1,000, 2,000. We'll get there. Thank you guys. Okay, let's get into some questions about these priorities specifically. And I'm going to start with the Climate Superfund because what's better than making polluters pay? This is the you clean up your own mess kind of principle that many of us recall from our days of our own childhood or supervising other small children. Is this the only way that we might approach that? Or there's something that I'm remembering about the Attorney General doing a climate accountability. Are we going down multiple paths at the same time? Or Nick, tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and I see Sean Mahoney, who is an attorney with CLF, who we're working very closely with this on, working very closely with on this bill. So, Sean, please jump in. But yes, so the Maine Attorney General has sued several of the oil majors and really large fossil fuel companies. Other state attorney generals have done this as well, and those lawsuits are typically sort of shorthanded as climate deception suits. They're about the lies fossil fuel companies have told about what greenhouse gas emissions do to the planet. The Maine Attorney General suit is a little interesting in that it goes a little further than those lawsuits. And so we're still teasing out exactly where the overlap might be between their suit and this suit. If nothing else, a program like this is a really good backstop just in case that litigation either fails or is limited in scope and no longer covers things that this bill would cover. Sean, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add to that.
Sure, Nick. Hi, everybody. I think the big difference, as Nick's right, the Attorney General suit is based on the idea that the oil companies deceive people and said there was no such thing as climate change when in fact their scientists were saying, yes, there is climate change and it's got a direct correlation with burning fossil fuels. So in a lot of ways, it's like the tobacco litigation that was brought a couple of decades ago by the state of Maine and many other states saying there's a deception and to recover costs as a result of that deception. The difference with the climate accountability legislation, and so that would be kind of one-time type of liability for deception. And it's a different bar that one has to be proved. And if people might have seen just recently, New York City's lawsuit against the oil and gas companies was just dismissed by a court in New York, basically saying you can't to New York City, you can't say that everybody recognizes climate is a huge problem and at the same time say that the oil companies deceive people about it. It's a little, there are issues with that. For the climate accountability suit, what that's doing is separate. It would be, if successful, it would be creating a fund that the oil and gas companies would pay into that would be available on an annual basis to fund climate resilience and adaptation related projects going forward. And it's a different level of proof required to throw those people into the pool of people who are going to have to fund this climate fund. Much like the Superfund, which has hazardous waste and hazardous substance producers pay a tax into a fund that is used to do the cleanup, or as Kathleen said, clean up the mess that you made, like we've all been taught you have to as a kid. So there's a big difference between the legislation and the litigation that the AG is currently doing. So they are complementary, but there's really not a whole lot of overlap over them. And they're two separate vehicles.
Thank you, Sean. That's super helpful. And thank you, Nick, for teeing that up. I think we have one of our other advocacy leads on the program today. Cole Cochran is with Maine Youth for Climate Justice. And Cole, if you want to come off mute and just share a little bit about why MYCJ and why youth advocates and more broadly are so invested in this priority.
And if Cole's not here, I think Jackson might be here as well.
Oh, yes. We've got the Zoom room is full of Maine Youth for Climate Justice, either one of you or both.
I'm happy to speak. I don't know if Cole's there or not, but the kind of youth climate justice movement is very much behind the Climate Superfund bill. Our generation will be facing the impacts of climate change for a very long time, and we want to ensure that we can mitigate and adapt to climate change as much as possible. And so the Climate Superfund bill would help us adapt to the impacts of climate change by forcing these companies to pay for damages they've caused to the environment. So we are very excited about supporting this bill this session and working with other members in the EPC. And if anyone has more specific questions, I'm happy to answer them at a later time.
Thank you, Jackson. Really, really appreciate your leadership on this and on a whole host of other priorities. So you'll find Jackson and Cole's information on that contact sheet later this afternoon. Want to figure out how you can be a good adult ally to the Maine Youth for Climate Justice movement. Please reach out to them. Feels like literally the least we can do. So let's talk about another one of our priorities. Let's get into transportation. I was really excited to see in news this week that a new bus service happening in Mid-Coast connecting Thomaston to the hospital and to Hannaford. And I was so excited about it. And then I thought, speaking of literally the least we can do, holy smokes, do we have a lot of work to do when it comes to transportation options and to clean transportation. Josh, you are front and center on my Zoom screen right now, so I might just throw it right to you and say, tell us a little bit more about that transportation bill. We've got questions about, is this going to help with, are there specifics around vehicle miles traveled? Are there specifics around public transport? How are we going to do this?
Wow, phenomenal questions. Yeah. So first of all, transportation is Plan A in Maine's climate action plan, right? And I was on the transportation working group this year. It's a really big priority. We've all agreed it's a really big priority, but actually implementing the solutions is really challenging. There are two kind of ways you can think about implementing those solutions: electrification, right? Getting more people into electric vehicles and replacing our combustion engine vehicles with electric, and reducing vehicle miles traveled, which is just the way to say driving less, providing people with more options like public transportation and active walking and biking, right? It aligns directly with some of our Grow Smart aims, where better walking and biking downtowns, more walkable communities, more reasons for people to get out of their cars. So this bill basically says our transportation planners have to plan in alignment with our climate action plan. That's number one. It sounds pretty basic, but we have some really phenomenal modeling that happened through the climate action plan process. And we need to make sure that any investments that Maine DOT or the Maine Turnpike Authority is making in the future align with that. And if you build a new road, it typically is the case that it induces demand and increases vehicle miles traveled. So if you're going to build a new road, you have to ensure you're offsetting that increase in vehicle miles traveled by at least as much by investing in public transit or active transportation. So I think this is really working on a lot of levels. It's a little bit technical, but in short, it will provide more focus on public transit and reducing the impact of our future investments in our transportation system. And happy to chat with people more offline.
Thank you, Josh. Josh has been such an incredible leader in the transportation realm, and definitely, if this is something you're thinking about, if this is something you're tackling in your community, look for his contact information this afternoon and reach out. He's got a wealth of information. Okay, going back to that idea about people cleaning up the messes that they made and that taking responsibility. Um, Sarah Woodbury, you're with Defend Our Health. You've been such a leader on PFAS, tackling the PFAS crisis. Will you say a little bit more about the EPC priority this year? And specifically, are we going to recover costs from PFAS manufacturers to help deal with this problem?
Yeah, so well, in terms of the AFFF spill in Brunswick, and AFFF is aqueous film forming firefighting foam. So it's a very specific type of foam that is used for like big chemical fires and stuff like that. For the most part, probably the responsibility of that spill lands squarely in the lap of the U.S. military. Not sure how much you know about the U.S. military, but they're not big fans of necessarily cleaning up messes that they've made. So unfortunately, they have been less than helpful in talking about cost recovery from that spill. So when we look at the EPC priority bill, if we waited around for manufacturers to kind of foot the bill for something like that, it would take a very long time. The state of Maine is currently in the process of suing. We have two different lawsuits around PFAS, one specific to AFFF and one specific to the contamination on the farmland. But those are class action lawsuits. They take a really long time. And they were implemented before the AFFF spill that happened in Brunswick. So I'm not sure, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not sure like how much finagling there would have to be to kind of include that in this. But regardless of the fact, those are class action lawsuits. They're going to take a really long time to recoup the costs. So what this particular bill do will unfortunately put the burden on the state of Maine to cover the initial setup of the system. It is our hope that as those lawsuits go through the court systems, that we will be able to recoup some of the costs that the state has put out there that has been used to help farmers, that it has been used for cleanup and stuff like that. But this particular bill will be like I think we're looking for some general funds to help cover the cost of setting up this kind of collection system that this bill will set up. And I think the estimated cost is around $5 million, estimated to be about 50,000 gallons of AFFF firefighting foam across the state. And it's it's a certain, I can't remember the exact dollar amount. I'm sure if I did the math quickly, I would be able to figure it out, but it's a decent chunk of change per gallon of AFFF. So this particular bill, the funding will have to come from the state. In the long run, we do have We do have class action lawsuits. The state is currently suing several large manufacturers to help recoup some of the cost. And I would not hold my breath on the military. So,
Kathleen, can I just add a little tidbit to that? Folks here might remember that we've already invested, I think, 60 million or 100 million. I can't remember what the number was in PFAS remediation. And we did that when I was chairing appropriations, and I made sure to write into that expenditure that when we get settlement money, that money goes directly back into the general fund so that Maine taxpayers are repaid for the money we have laid out to fix this problem. So note to everybody for the future.
it was $60 million from the general fund, and then there was 20 million from a couple of other funds. And yeah, so there's about 80 million sitting out there to help PFAS impacted farmers, which we are greatly appreciative of former Senator Cathy Breen and the governor for putting forward. But yes, hopefully we will eventually get that money back from 3M and DuPont and Chemours, which are, basically financially responsible for the mess that we're in.
That might be a big theme in our EPC priorities this year. Thank you to everyone who was able to join today, share a little bit more about your bills. We have more good questions that we are not going to get to, but like I said earlier, you will get a ton of information via email later this afternoon, and all 39 organizations that make up the Environmental Priorities Coalition are here to answer your questions and help connect you with lawmakers. We could not do this work without you, and we're really grateful for you joining us today. I am also really grateful for you joining us, not just today, but over almost 5 years of Lunch and Learns. Had no idea when we kicked off the first Lunch and Learns in the early days of the COVID lockdowns, and we were all looking for things to do and ways to stay connected, that we would still be doing this in 2025, and that the program would have grown and become such an important part of all of our lives. I'm feeling especially reflective today because this is actually my last Lunch and Learn in this seat. I am getting ready to bid farewell to my colleagues at Maine Conservation Voters and to join the team at the National League of Conservation Voters. I will still be in this exact same chair, in this exact same Zoom room, but the next time we see each other on the Lunch and Learns, I will be sitting where you all are and watching the incredible Maggie Summers, who has done so much to build this program over the last few years, and the whole rest of the MCV team. I cannot wait to see what you all program. I cannot wait to pepper you with questions in the chat, and I cannot wait to continue this work with all of you in my new role. And just huge hugs, huge gratitude. I appreciate you all and wish you all the best. So stay warm out there. Look for that email this afternoon, and a million thanks, and see you soon.